I would like to welcome everyone to another episode of Recovery with Twicket. My name is Tawny, and I'm a recovering addict alcoholic. And here we have on our show today Jonas, and I would like for him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Tawny. My name is Jonas, and I am a recovered alcoholic drug addict.
Welcome, and I just want to thank you for coming and joining my podcast. So, I wanted to know, where did you come from? Where did this all kind of begin for you? What journey would you like to share with us?
I want to say thank you, starters. Appreciate you inviting me to be on this and share my experience, strength, and hope with somebody. I hope that it is able to help somebody. I guess my journey started. I grew up. Like most people do nowadays, in a broken home. Unfortunately, uh, I was raised by my mother and stepfather, and I had some step siblings. I didn't really know my father growing up. My grandparents helped raise me. Um, I when I stayed with my grandparents, I stayed on a farm and was kind of a country kid and wasn't around very many people. Was around some family, but uh, I spent the weekends and the summers, with my grandparents on a farm, and that made it tough for living in the city during the week and during the school year. I really didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I didn't have those friends on the weekends. Really, I never really felt like I fit in anywhere, and I think that kind of mental health wasn't really a big thing um, in the 80s and 90s. Especially with kids, it was a toughen up and we'll get through it type of thing. And I think that really caused some problems that I didn't understand at the time. There's always this feeling of uneasiness whenever I got around other people my age. It was tough for me because my friends that I had in school, they had other friends that they got to hang out with on the weekends, and they got to do things in the summer. Uh, Later on, um, when I was in middle school, especially, it really caused some problems. Where uh, I recognize it now as it was anxiety and it was depression. I didn't know what that was then. I just knew that there was this uneasiness about me. I felt sick to my stomach. Um,
Right.
I never really could feel comfortable. In high school, things started to change. I got some friends and I got a vehicle and I could travel around and you start dating and you start doing things and with that came like most people in high school do, the drinking started. and and all of a sudden I felt like I was a part of something. I could feel at ease around other people. um,
Sure.
and that turned into uh, my home. There was a lot of drinking that went on at home, and that gave me access to you know to alcohol. I would sneak beer out of the refrigerator, and it started off kind of slow, but this thing progresses.
For
um,
sure.
it started off slow, and before you know it, I'm taking a 6 pack of Bud Light out of the refrigerator every morning and drinking it in the high school parking lot. And hey, when you're the kid that shows up at school with the alcohol, you're already popular. You're already on the road to being the cool kid. So.
Right.
Uh, all of a sudden, I felt like I was a part of, and I felt like I could be comfortable around people. That sense of uneasiness kind of went away. Uh, there was still some depression in there. There were still moments of anxiety, and I couldn't figure out why it would come and go. But there were all those moments where I was anxious and depressed was whenever I was sober. You know, because I didn't know these feelings or how to deal with these feelings.
Right.
The feelings of depression. Um, I didn't really know my dad growing up. And, those are not excuses. It's and not trying to feel sorry for myself or self pity. Those just I'm sure they are contributing factors to what I had going on in life.
For
Um,
sure.
as time went on, you know, I I ended up getting my girlfriend pregnant. I dropped out of high school. Um, my second semester, my senior year, I thought I was going to do great things, and I didn't need school for doing the things that I wanted to do. Driving truck and farming and all these things that I learned growing up on the farm. Um, and dropping out of high school, that just spurred on this whole alcoholism thing, and I ended up moving to Wichita, living with my dad that I barely even knew, and here I'm moving in with my dad. My mom and my stepfather, they moved to Tennessee, and I didn't want to move to Tennessee with them, and so I moved to Wichita, and living in Wichita when you're 18 years old, and there's a college night every night. There's a college night, and I went to work at Walmart, working from noon to 8 or noon to 9. So nothing gets started at the bar until 9 or 10 o'clock.
Right.
Anyway, so it turned it just started this thing where I was just out every night, and I was drinking every night, and at the time I thought I was having a blast. I was having the time of my life. I was fitting in with these people. I was socializing. Um, it, it and it just this thing just progresses, and it doesn't ever get better. It seems like, looking back, I see it now as I had all these emotions that I didn't know what to do with. I was full of fear. I was full of anger. I was full of a lot of things. Um, that that just kept progressing. I ended up moving back to Western Kansas, um, and I ended up uh, starting to drive truck. I went on a harvest crew. I that girlfriend that I got pregnant there in high school had a miscarriage. Um, that one didn't turn out. I ended up getting another girl pregnant, and I wasn't there for that kid. Uh, I was scared. I was young and I was scared. I didn't know how to deal with those things. And what did I do? I do what we all do, and just dump dump whatever substances I can find on top of it to cover those feelings up,
Right.
and just went about my life. And, it just kept getting worse. Uh, it Nothing never got better. It just kept continuing, and through my 20s, it just kept escalating. Uh, the drinking in my early 20s turned into drugs,
Right.
and and once you get that ball rolling, it is hard to stop. Um, and the biggest reason is I couldn't understand myself. I didn't understand what was happening. Like I said, the mental health thing, it wasn't even, I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know what these feelings were. Just
Right.
this restless, irritable, and discontent feeling. Um,
Right.
and it just continued. In my late 30 or in my late 20s, I ended up having another child. I had a little girl, And there again, scared to death, didn't want to become an adult, didn't want to take on responsibility. It just continued. Um, I ended up having, when I was 30, I had a little boy, and I I thought at that time my life was going to change. I had made the decision that life is going to change now. It's time to get serious about this. Um, I had custody of my daughter at the time. Everything felt like it was falling into place. I got married. I had a family. I had a good job, and I really wanted to turn my life around. Uh, but then again, this anxiety, depression, this fear, this everything else just consumed my life. Uh, I was so scared. Of the unknown, and the unknown of change. And I continued to drink, and I continued to use. And as we know, this progression just goes and goes. Before you know it, I'm getting divorced, and I'm losing custody of my kids. And I tried to do these geographical changes, and I tried to change where I'm living and the people that I'm around, and believe it or not, it follows you everywhere you go. it,
Strangely enough. Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you go. These problems still follow us around. There was times where I would quit using the drugs, but the alcohol would just take over. And there was times that I would quit the alcohol and then the drugs would take over. It was just a constant cycle. Um, it felt like I couldn't get away from it. Um, the the losing my wife, losing my kids, sent me into a depression like I'd never seen before. I started to have panic attacks for the first time in my life, which there again, I didn't know what they were. I just knew that I break down, I couldn't breathe, uncontrollable crying, and as as an adult male, that's hard to deal with. It's really hard to deal with. I wasn't raised the way to really know how to deal with your emotions. So it was really tough. It was really hard for me. Um, I knew that if I could get away from the drugs, I could get away from the alcohol, I could still be in my kids' life. And my kids meant more to me than anything in the world. I had this bond with them and this love for them, and and I didn't know. I just couldn't. Every time that I would quit the drugs and the alcohol, something would trigger it again. Something would trigger those emotions would come up, and I couldn't deal with those emotions. The only way that I knew how to deal with those emotions was to drown them out, to drown them
Right.
out. Um, it and it just it just like it does for all of us. It just progressively got worse, and I lost all rights to my daughter, and for failing to be around. They called it child abandonment because I hadn't had the contact with her in a year. My own flesh and blood, somebody that I would die for. And this thing had consumed me to the point where I still thought that these things meant more to me than my kids meant more to me than anything in the world. Yeah, I could not stop drinking. I could not. I it, I was consumed to the point that I you couldn't have convinced me that I was an alcoholic. You couldn't have convinced me that I was a drug addict. These were things that and I would try to convince myself that I could stop at any time. I could stop at any time because I could stop at any time until I picked back up.
Right.
and, and
Until I
and
couldn't.
and it just kept going. There's that cycle, and and I was fairly successful early on in life, and I had I had nice things, and I lived in nice houses, and I kept convincing myself that was I was successful because of these material things. I was
Right.
successful because I made, X amount of dollars a year, and nobody else my age is making that kind of money. Or and a drug addict is somebody that you see on the street, that's homeless, that you see living under bridges, and
Yeah.
it was I just couldn't wrap my head around it, why these things were happening to me. And I was convinced that God was doing these things to me, that God was punishing me for the things that I had done, and and that I was immoral in the things I had done when I was younger, and I was convinced that God was just punishing me for everything. After losing my kids, um, I didn't feel like that I had anything left to live for. Um, I Before I lost my son, custody or all rights to my son, my youngest son, uh, there was a court order for a drug for drug testing, and all I had to do was show up and do the drug testing, and I couldn't I couldn't keep myself clean for a hair follicle test for 90 days to pass a hair follicle test.
Right.
Um, there was a couple of times that I made it to 90 days drug free, and I would get a text message or I'd get a phone call, and trigger that. It would trigger it. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions, and I'd flip out. And next thing you know, I'm I'm back using. Well, there went another 90 days. We're gonna have to. So it was just a constant cycle that I just couldn't. I couldn't get myself out of. Um, During these times, there were several suicide attempts. And it was I felt alone. I'd never felt like I'd done these geographical changes, and I distanced myself from so many people, that I found myself living out in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere, and with no friends, no nothing. Um, but this thing follows us everywhere we go, and it uh it just didn't get any better. Despite trying to quit drinking, despite trying to quit using, it just kept on. Before you know it, um, I'm living in Wichita, and and that turns into and we're talking in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. And I had money whenever I showed up. I had a little bit of money, and that allowed me to you know to buy enough drugs to sell, to do what I needed to do to survive. I
Right.
I I got a letter in the mail saying, "Hey, they're going to have a court date. You need to show up on such and such day, um, if you want to have anything to do with your son, or we're gonna do the child abandonment thing, and you're not going to have rights."
Right.
You know, and all I would have had to do was show up, um, and and that meant more to me than anything in the world. This was my son we're talking about, my best friend, my everything. And the court date come up, and I was too high to show up to court. No, I couldn't show up. And there again, the depression kicks in. Um, and then the pandemic happened, and I'm living on the street. I'm living on the street in Wichita, doing things that I said I'd never do ever in my life. Um, there was the robberies, and there was the stealing, and there was it just constant. Um, Things that, like I said, I never, you lose this thing that progresses, and you lose all sight of what's in front of you. And, and here I was, 30, 38, 39 years old, lost my kids, lost my family, lost everything. Uh, Living on the street, and I just you couldn't. Jail did not scare me, and death did not scare me. Nothing scared me. And when you have nothing to lose and nothing to live for, you're in a scary place. You're in a real scary place. And I did that for about 6 months, and uh, I wake up in Wichita one day, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? You're eating out of trash cans. We're behind Little Caesars and Pizza Hut at 3 o'clock in the morning, and Winchell's Donuts, and getting food to live. Is this really where our life is taking us? Is this? And I called a friend in Western Kansas, and he said, you can't come stay with me, but we'll find you a job, we'll find you a place to stay. And I did that geographical change again.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, get me off the streets, get me out of the environment I am, and hopefully I can turn this around. And uh, move to Western Kansas, and where do I go? I go to working at a bar, and living in a hotel, and you would have thought that I was still in the same situation, but it was a good opportunity, and somehow I the alcoholism kicked in, and you can't work at a bar. An alcoholic, it just doesn't work. Uh,
Right.
and uh, you know, uh, that went on for about a month or so. The next thing you know, I'm living in a little bitty city, a little bitty town in western Kansas, and living on the street again, and no vehicle, no nothing. And this depression was just out of control. And the suicidal thoughts were there, and the suicidal tendencies were there. And one day I found myself just praying to God to take my life. Because I it wasn't worth living anymore. I convinced myself that if my kids, and when my kids got older and found out how hard life is, and found out how hard things were, and where I was at in life, that they would understand. And it was better off that I not be around, and for them to know that I was living on the street and I was doing these things. I convinced myself that suicide was the only way out. It was
Right.
it was the only way out. I didn't want to drink anymore. I didn't want to use anymore. I didn't know how to live life. I couldn't live life sober. The emotions and the depression were too much for me to handle.
Right.
And on July 20th of 2020, uh, I had a suicide attempt. Um, They found me unconscious and unresponsive. They loaded me up in the ambulance, took me to the emergency room, cut all my clothes off of me, um, you know, and I came to in the emergency room with my best friend yelling at me in the emergency room, and saying, "What did you do? What did you do?" Just yelling at me. And And all I could tell him was I was sad.
Right.
I was sad. That's the only thing I could come up with. Um, they asked me if I had anybody they could call, and I told them to call my mom. My mom was living in Tennessee, uh, and they called her, and I will never forget the sound of her voice and her crying on the phone when they said that they had found me and that there was a suicide attempt. And uh, something that day changed. Um, they took me to Garden City in the ambulance, which was like 90 miles away. Put me in the psych ward, and this is all during COVID. Everything's on lockdown. There's a there wasn't a whole lot of resources available at that time, and and in the psych ward, I was open to anything at that juncture. I was it was I'm good at a lot of things, but I guess suicide's not one of them. And if, I never wanted to ever hear my mom like that again. I never wanted to ever think that my mom would have to deal with that. And it was time to do something different. Um, they got me on some medication for the first time in my life. Um, and to help with the depression, to help with the anxiety. They kept me, they 5150 me, so they only had to keep me for 72 hours. You know, you know, thank God, God had to have, it is all part of God's plan to start with, but uh, they kept me for 8 days, and the reason they kept me for 8 days is they knew that if they turned me loose, I had nowhere to go, and I
Right.
kept telling them I didn't want to go back to the street. I didn't want to go, but I could live on the street. I knew how to survive. I mean, I could make it work if I had to.
For sure.
Uh, they told me that they thought maybe a drug and alcohol treatment center would be good for me. Well, the only thing I knew about treatment centers was everybody that I knew that went to them came out with more connections than they had when they went in. I had never seen it work before, and they gave me a phone number to call, and they told me that I had to make the phone call, and that was the hardest thing that I had done in my life up to that point, was to make the phone call to the RADAC to have an evaluation done so that I could possibly get into a treatment center. Because making that phone call meant that I was admitting that I had a problem.
Right.
Before that, I didn't have the problem. You had a problem with me doing the drugs and alcohol. That was my problem.
Right.
If you would just leave me alone and let me do what I needed to do, then we wouldn't have this problem. So I made the phone call, and they didn't have a bed for me right away. Um, but a couple days went by, and they had one. So I was in the psych ward for 8 days. They turned me loose, and all I had, they'd cut all my clothes off of me whenever they took me to the emergency room. So here I was in the psych ward. All I had was, my scrubs and my grippy socks.
Right.
I had a couple of friends that did find out where I was at, and they brought me a pair of sweatpants, a shirt, um, and a couple of pieces of clothes, and that's all I had. I left the psych ward with a little Dylan sack with some stuff in it, and that was it. And I went to a treatment center, and life, it was scary. It was scary. Change was so scary, and I'm thinking, how am I going to live life? Here I am, uh, you know 39 or however old I was at the time, and I didn't know. I I was starting life over. I was starting life over,
Right.
and during COVID, they were not letting people into the treatment centers, and I was lucky enough to get a bed. And whenever I went to the treatment center, they started talking to me about what the disease of alcoholism is and what the disease of drug addiction is. Because I never thought it was a disease. I never knew what it was. I never understood why it was that once I started to drink, I couldn't stop.
Right.
I could buy a case of water and it'd take me a week to drink it, but I buy a case of beer and I could have it gone in 12 hours.
Absolutely.
Why is this? And I didn't understand this phenomena of craving. And this physical allergy. They started to explain some of these things to me, and and something changed. Something in my brain chemistry changed that day for that day, that suicide attempt, and things really started to progress the other direction. And I started to see that there were people out here that had the same thing that I had, that were now living life sober, and were living life clean. Oh, I left treatment, got into an Oxford house. Uh, Oxford did an amazing thing for me. It allowed me to surround myself with like-minded people that were in recovery, um, and really start to explore the recovery community.
Right.
Um, and when I had bad days, I had a brotherhood and a sisterhood of people that were there to help me through those tough days. I started going to some 12-step meetings, um, and I tried to get involved for the first 18 months of my sobriety. I really tried to get involved. That being said, I couldn't find a sponsor. I couldn't find a sponsor that would work with me. I couldn't find these things. And I one day one day I decided to go to church. And I walked into the church, and it was like the sermon was directed exactly right towards me. And before I know it, I'm crying, and I've got goosebumps, and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, here I'm 18 months sober, but I haven't done anything to work on my mental health, and I've been going to meetings. I've
Yeah.
been through inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, but I still have these emotions. Every once in a while, these suicidal thoughts are still coming back, and I can't figure out why. Because I've been off away from drugs. I've been away from. I don't talk to my old friends. I relocate. I've done all these things,
Right.
and and something happened in church that day, and I just felt like there was this calming effect that happened after the crying and the goosebumps and everything else went away. Everything was going to be okay,
Right.
I left there wanting more. I left there saying there's something to this, because God was this punishable person, this punishing person that punished me all this time. And I've been working on this. Everybody talked about spirituality and all this other stuff, man. And I've tried to figure this out, and I couldn't figure it out. And the lesson is on the student and not on the teacher. These people were trying to teach me these things and tell me, and I just wasn't ready to receive it. Uh, and I ended up starting to go to church regularly. I started receiving the message. I started getting into scripture, and I started going to another 12-step program. And in that 12-step program, it it just took off. It just took off. I ended up with an amazing sponsor, and got through the steps, and did what I needed to do, and got into service work at the same time. I'm studying scripture. I'm getting into scripture. I'm figuring out that God is this loving God, and that God wants, all his children to thrive. And I'm like, where does this come from? Well, why haven't I ever heard of this before? And then, uh, you know, uh, um, at 43 or 42 years old, uh, I was baptized in church, and my life really started to change at that point. Um,
Right.
the mental illnesses that I had, I got off the medication I was on, and I haven't been on any of that medication since then. Um, and that doesn't happen to everybody. And I'm not
Right.
saying that that's gonna happen to everybody. I just know that whenever I got in a 12-step program, I figured out that I was a selfish, full of fear, uh, dishonest individual,
Right.
and that I had resentments and anger built up from years before I get into these steps. I start to work these steps, and they talk about these 12 steps. I was reading them, 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings a week. I was reading these 12 steps and it's not understanding a thing about them until I got a sponsor that showed me
Yeah.
what this was all about. and
Yeah.
and I get into the literature, and I start to work through these steps, and I figure out, that there is a God, and I'm not it. and
Right.
that anything, we get to the third step and we're turning our life over to something that I don't even know. And I'm like, and they're like, you could turn it over to anything because anything's going to be making better decisions than you make.
Right.
You've been making for your life. I mean, it doesn't matter. The trash can makes better decisions than you make. So,
Absolutely.
at least the trash can's not going to take you out to the bar. So
Yeah.
I start to get into these steps. I start to do these things, and things really start to take off for me. Um, I start to be of service, and not that individual that was stuck on me. I figure out that depression is the most sincere form of selfishness there is. 'Cause when I'm depressed, everything's all about me. Everything's about me, and I thrive in self pity. I thrive in these things. I love to feel sorry for myself. I love to isolate. You know, I, Social anxiety was a real thing early in sobriety.
Yeah.
And I start to get out of that. I start to get out of that cycle. I start to be of service to other people. I start sponsoring other people, and I start to go to treatment centers, and I'm going to speak at treatment centers, and I make that a regular thing. And I'm taking meetings to the treatment centers. I'm doing it. I'm getting out of myself, and before you know it, I'm I don't I don't know when it happened, but the depression, the anxiety, these things just started to disappear.
Right.
Um, some of these promises really started to come true. Things really started to turn around in my life, and good things started to happen. Opportunities just started appearing, out of nowhere. Um, when that really started getting going, um, I got news that my best friend that was yelling at me in the hospital that day, I hadn't talked to him, in 2 years, or in a year. I hadn't talked to him. He ends up passing away. He had an accident and died during that
Right.
time. And during that time, a month after that, I got a phone call from the doctor saying that, my mom was sick, and if I wanted to see her, that I needed to get to Tennessee. And I had I was far enough into recovery that I had the money, and I got on a plane the next day, and I flew to Tennessee, and my mom, I got to see my mom when she passed away. My mom yeah, these things, these big hits happened, and somehow I managed to stay sober. Um, and those were things that there's no way I could have ever got through. Um, my mom got to see me sober for the first time in my adult life, before she passed away. That is some of these things are some of the blessings that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Um,
Right.
but the service work just keeps continuing. I figured out that I'm not alone in the world anymore. That I don't feel alone like I used to. I understand what emotions are now. Um, you know,
Don't always have to like them, but we have them.
the the worst part about recovery is you get your emotions back. The best part about recovery is you get your emotions back.
Right.
Is you get to feel these things. And the suicidal thoughts haven't come back. Knock on wood. As long as I keep continuing to do the things I'm doing, as long as I keep continuing to work on myself, as long as I keep continue to be of service to other people, I don't see those things coming back.
Right.
The obsession that I had to drink and use, was is gone away. It's been lifted. I've been freed of that.
Right.
I can feel happy, joyous, and free now. I'm in a relationship today with another person. And I have this great relationship with my girlfriend that I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to have again. I thought I was
Right.
going to be alone for the rest of my life. And these things, they're just God's blessings.
For
I
sure.
see that now. I see what it is, and I see it for what it is, and I give all the glory to God. I do.
Absolutely.
And that gets me through the day. I wake up and I pray. I pray before I go to bed, and I do these, the 10-step inventories, and 11-step prayer and meditation every day. And it really has. Life has turned around. 100%. Those kids that I thought that I'd never be able to talk to again until I was, they turned 18. Um, Last Sunday, I got to see my son, for the first time in 6 years, and that was amazing. That was um, God's blessings. For the 4 years that I've been in recovery, there were days that I would break down. There were days that I would cry. There were days that I didn't understand why, I was doing all these things, and why can't I see my kids? And early in recovery, I think that if I would have seen them, if I would have got to see my kids, I wouldn't have continued to do the work on myself that I've done on myself. And chances are I'd probably be back. But today I'm in a spot where I'm being the best version of myself every day. And I get these opportunities given to me. They come from nowhere. God just plops them in my lap, to be of service and to do things just like this thing today. This is an amazing thing. Um, and I hope that something that I said can help somebody out down the road, and let them know that there is hope. There is hope. We can beat this thing. If a junkie like me can turn their life around, and go from eating out of trash cans, to just thriving in life, uh, I promise you, anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of where I'm at in life today. Is you know I, God just continues to bless me. I continue to work on my relationship with God. I continue to be of service. I continue to work on my program of recovery. Um, and when I do that, it just seems like there's not a whole lot that can go wrong. I've set myself up with
Right.
this amazing community, this recovery community, this circle of friends that I have that's bigger than any circle that I ever would have thought that I'd ever have. And
Right.
it's life is amazing today. It truly is amazing, and it just keeps getting better.
Absolutely. I thank you so much for your share. I do have a couple of questions that I. The microphone's kind of far away. Okay. I do have a couple of questions that I want to follow up with you. So, what are some of the biggest or toughest challenges that you faced in early recovery, and how did you overcome those?
Ooh, there were several. There were several that um, survivor's guilt was a big one. Um, I didn't understand why I was given this opportunity and other people weren't. Um, and and not understanding these emotions still and not knowing how to deal with them, and all of a sudden I don't have the drugs and alcohol to throw on the problem anymore. um uh, the mental health was a big one. That self-doubt um was big, but making sure that making sure that I continue to not isolate and try to get out there, because social anxiety, that goes right along with the emotions. The social anxiety was probably one of the biggest things, but just trying to navigate life for the first time as an adult, and navigate life with sober
Right,
sober. Hmm.
for sure. Um, how do you prioritize self care in your recovery?
Ooh, that's a tough one too, because I know that I've filled up my life. Uh, some people say I'm too busy. Some people say that I'm too busy. That I don't give myself enough time. But at the same time, I do the things that make me happy, the things that give me joy. Being of service, that brings me happiness and joy. Um, Making sure that I take time out of the week to spend with people that I truly care about. That's not work.
Right,
I love people I work with, but I need to make sure that I make time for myself to do those kind of things.
for sure. Thank you. Um, and excuse me, sorry. Can you share a pivotal moment or experience that shifted your perspective on your recovery?
Uh, I think that what the moment that things really turned around and shifted in my recovery was when I found a home group and a sponsor, and I finally felt a part of something, and I could see these people that were living in the solution, and and it was no longer about going to meetings and hearing hearing problems. It was going to meetings and hearing solutions. And I thought, if these people can do it, it's possible. It's possible. And I think that was the biggest pivotal moment in my recovery.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the questions that I have for you. And I want to thank you so much for being a part of this. And I will be talking to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Tani.